Hey guys, it's Ria, and as promised, here I am with a preseason update. And don't worry, I'm not going to be spending this video talking about scores and standings and all that jazz because quite frankly, none of that matters, right? I mean, statistically speaking, there is no correlation between preseason records and regular season records, so why even bother? But we are halfway through preseason, which means we're starting to paint a clearer picture of what each team's final 53 will look like. Now remember, the NFL is no longer doing 2 rounds of cuts, so instead of going from 90 to 75 and then to 53, you can go straight from 90 to 53 so long as you do so by the cutoff, which is September 3rd at 3 p.m. Central. Now there's still some things to keep an eye on during these last 2 weeks of preseason. We've got players who are fighting for their rightful spots within the team's depth chart still, new coaches and new systems, so we're seeing how they impact their teams. You have key injuries and adjusted recovery timelines to keep an eye on. And then finally, performance of key pickups from free agency too. Anyway, in the last episode, I said that in this episode, I would talk about 2 things: TV broadcasts and online streaming options, and then your fantasy questions. I actually ended up getting a lot of fantasy questions, so I'm gonna pivot and devote this video to answering those. And if you still have questions about TV broadcasts and online streaming options, feel free to post them in the comments below or tweet at me at InstantRiyaPlay and I'd be more than happy to help. Okay, so one of the questions that I got was, I like to wait on QBs until round 8+. Can you suggest some viable QBs that might be worth a look in the later rounds? Sure, so the first thing that I'm going to say about this question, and it likely applies to advice that I'm going to give later on in the video too, is that when I'm looking at players to draft, rankings alone are not enough to tell me when or when not to jump on a certain player of a certain position. So for example, when I'm looking at drafting a quarterback, I like to think of it in terms of tiers. Grouping players by tiers basically means that each player within that tier is essentially interchangeable because they're expected to put up similar numbers to one another. Looking at it this way helps me get the most value out of my picks. If you're reaching for a quarterback early, like really early, we're talking rounds 3 and 4, it has to be a tier 1 guy. And in my eyes, there's only 2 of those: Rodgers and Brady. Now, some might argue that Drew Brees also falls into this category. I mean, I don't think he does, but to each their own. The next tier of guys are going to be the ones that fantasy footballers tend to snag in the 5th and 6th rounds. In my opinion, these are your Matt Ryans, your Russell Wilsons, and maybe Ben Roethlisberger. But if you're waiting until the 8th round or later to grab a quarterback, there's really no reason to rush, right? Because at that point, you got plenty of tier 3 guys who are going to provide you similar value. My advice would be to look at who's left on the board, and if you're really struggling to make a decision at that point, try to go with a quarterback from a team who's known for passing the ball. For example, Derek Carr is bouncing back from an injury. He runs a pass-heavy offense with the Raiders, and with Cooper and Crabtree to throw to, there is no doubt he's got the weapons. Phillip Rivers is another example, provided that Anthony Lynn continues to run that similar pass-heavy system. You also have Jameis Winston, Cam Newton, Marcus Mariota, and there's others that fall into this tier as well. Essentially, my recommendation here is, before your draft, print off your cheat sheet. For each position, group your guys into tiers. Throughout the draft, you can keep track of who's off the board, and then this way you can play your odds and get the most value out of your pick. Next question is, what do you think of Blake Bortles this season? Does he finish as a top 10 QB? I'm pretty sure this is a troll question, but I'll humor you and answer it anyway. No, Blake Bortles finishes nowhere near the top 10. In fact, there's a chance he doesn't even finish in the bottom 10 of 32 because depending on how the rest of preseason goes, Chad Henne might end up with the starting job in Jacksonville. Do you trust Doug Martin as an RB2 when he returns, or would you rather look elsewhere and forget him altogether? I don't trust him. I mean, there's so many other options for running backs who provide similar value and will be available when you're looking for an RB2. I mean, refer back to my rant that I had earlier about tiers, right? Why would you waste 3 weeks on a guy when I can literally name 10 guys right now who are expected to put up similar numbers week over week? Let's also not forget the fact that he was out for 6 games last season due to a hamstring injury. So my advice here is going to be let somebody else take that risk, and come week 4 when he's returning, if you really want him then, work out a trade or something, but pass him up in this draft. Isaiah, CJ Anderson, or Dalvin Cook, who would you rather have as your RB2? For me, it's Crow, Cook, CJ Anderson in that order. And then Isaiah and Cook are pretty close for me, actually, almost interchangeable, but CJ Anderson just doesn't make the cut. Doug Baldwin in PPR, back-to-back top 10 finishes, but do you trust him enough in mid-second over Amari and Nook types? So in my opinion, this is a loaded question because do I trust Doug Baldwin to put up solid numbers again this year? Yeah, most definitely. He's a good, experienced route runner, and he has chemistry with his quarterback. I have no reason not to trust him. Do I trust him over Cooper and Hopkins? Not necessarily. I mean, to me, he falls in the same category as those two. But I guess with it being PPR, Doug Baldwin's definitely a safe choice out of these 3 because you know he's going to get his targets, you know he's going to get yards, and you know he's going to get touchdowns. I'm sold. Number 3 pick, standard. Do I go Shady, even if he's likely to be traded, or AB, even with the surplus of wide receivers in the league? First of all, I'm going to go on the record and say I don't even think LaShawn McCoy's being traded this year. I know there's rumors aplenty flying around, but I just don't know about that. Regardless of if he stays or goes, though, and I may be in the minority here, I'm not passing up on Antonio Brown if he's available. It's AB for me. Being a Packers fan, what are your thoughts on Williams versus Monty? So it does kind of seem like Jamal Williams kind of came out of nowhere and may play an integral part in the Packers offense this year. Ty is back from suffering from a soft tissue leg injury, and he'll most definitely be the starter here. But Jamal's outlook is trending upward, and I think he's a fantastic bet for a late round pickup. Out of the 4 rookie backs making noise, who has the best season this year? Cook, C-Mac, Fournette, or Mixon? This is by far the hardest question. Man, in good faith, it is so hard for me to hop on the Fournette train because I'm of the belief that no matter how good an individual player is, you can only be as good as the team that surrounds you. But then I also firmly believe that when you're choosing a fantasy player, especially in the earlier rounds, you need to go with the player with the highest floor, not necessarily the highest ceiling. So in this case, out of Fournette, Cook, McCaffrey, Mixon, we know that Fournette is going to get his touches because the Jaguars' offense is all but relying solely on him to run their offense. So provided that he stays healthy, he's going to end up with decent numbers based on the sheer volume of carries that he's going to get. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got Mixon, who has great talent, but not a great situation. He has potential to do great things. So in other words, high ceiling, right? But with Jeremy and Gio still around, still relevant, it's just not a guaranteed opportunity to shine for Mixon. So in other words, really low floor. At the end of the day, I have to go with Fournette. Okay, guys, I'm going to do one more question because I'm starting to get really sleepy. Rhea, I noticed in a mock today that Odell dropped to the 4th round. Is this due to the Eclipse video? Definitely. 100%. His eyes don't work anymore, so his value just plummeted. No, in all seriousness, Odell Beckham is still very much relevant, despite the fact that he just sustained an injury. We all saw that happen during preseason with it looked like a knee injury. It was a clean hit. It was a low hit. Definitely looked like it was going to be a knee. Could have been a lot worse than it really was, but it turned out to be just an ankle sprain. Hopefully he gets better soon. He might miss a week of regular season, but even if he does, in my opinion, he still goes in the top 5 guys. All right, guys and gals, that is it from me for this week's episode. My next video will be posted on September 6th, which is the day before NFL regular season kicks off, and I could not be more excited. In the meantime, if you have any questions for me or topics that you'd like me to address in a future video, go ahead and post it in the comments below, or feel free to tweet at me at InstantRiyaPlay. Until then, guys, enjoy the rest of preseason. Good luck in your fantasy drafts, and I will see you in September.